What also worked for me is that I turned a blind eye in some sense towards that. Well, I'm not seeing my aunts or, a lot of women out in the field. Does it mean I should worry about it? I mean, is there a reason? Is it like is it a nerdy profession? But I did turn a blind eye. I said, okay, let me see how far I can get this little sparkle in me going.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Innovating India. This week we have with us the very fabulous Gargi Gupta. She heads research and she's the Chief Technology Officer of IBM India and South Asia. She's astonishingly young and she's been behind some of IBM's most path-breaking initiatives from a research point of view, whether it's AI or automation. Thank you, Gargi. Delighted to have you here with us. So excited to be speaking to you. There's so many things about what you do and how you've done it have been very fascinating. But let me begin by asking you the first question that came to my mind. You are you're very young and you are leading a technology giant in India from in a huge role, right? So I'm just curious to know, how did you always plan your career to get to this place? Because there's this whole perception out there that tech is not an industry for women. Corporates specifically, whether it's corporates or even startups for that matter, the whole the perception out there is that this is not where women are able to crack the glass ceiling as easily.
Thank you. Thank you, Shweta. First of all, delighted to be on the show. So thank you for having me here. So I mean, technology is not a space where women have treaded in normal circumstances, right? But I want to tell you what worked for me. So I think I was very good at catching signals early on. So when I was in school, for example, I would always be more inclined towards the analytical types of problems, would ask lots of questions on why, how can you break before you make, right? So I caught on to that little skill in me, which stayed with me all through my growing up years, my teenage years. And I started dabbling with computers very early on. What also worked for me is that I turned a blind eye in some sense towards that. Well, I'm not seeing my aunts or, a lot of women out in the field. Does it mean I should worry about it? I mean, is there a reason? Is it like is it a nerdy profession? But I did turn a blind eye. I said, okay, let me see how far I can get this little sparkle in me going. And so that continued. I think one of the most important steps I would say, Shweta, I took is really about deciding to do a PhD. And I went back and forth, is research really for me? What does it mean? What are the effects it has on the life? I'm not seeing a lot of women. I was in the US, so of course, more women than here in India. But I think I said, I'll give it a shot. If at 3-4 years I'm not getting anywhere, I'll get out of it. And I think that journey really prepared me to learn the skill of continuous learning and unlearning and relearning. So I think the PhD, more than what I focused on and the deep problems I solved or the papers I published, the interaction with my advisor and peers, it's really the process of learning. And that equipped me very well later on to, of course, get into IBM research, but also have a successful career there.
So did you always see yourself here? Or were there some surprises along the way?
I don't think I saw myself leading the research lab, but I saw myself at the cross section of industrial research and what matters to people, to clients. I mean, how do I always had this niggling question before I addressed a problem. Who cares about this? If I solve this, what is the next set of big impact and outcome it's going to be? And I think that's the sweet spot where industrial research is, right? So maybe that was
I think that's a fundamental question all of us ask, right? When we're doing our work, who cares about this? Let me talk to you about industrial research. What's the kind of work that that's happening in India, that's disrupting and that's disrupting companies, and that's making them work more efficiently and making them relook at how they've done business? Maybe if you could highlight three big initiatives that IBM has led in the country, to make businesses more efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. So overall, IBM is a hybrid cloud and AI company, right? So we believe our transformations, we enable customers to go and reinvent their businesses so that they can, bring in new functionalities into the business. And IBM provides really the platform, the cloud, the AI mechanisms to do that. So for example, I'll give you an example of two things that we did in India. So we worked with Bestseller, which is a top retail brand, and they wanted to bring in more determinism into their planning life cycle. How do they plan out what products to create, where to store them, which shops are selling what products? And so it's a huge ecosystem of supply chains, right? And there's a lot of data out there, both unstructured data, which is the buying behavior of people like you and me. What do we go and pick up in the stores? And different cities, different stores will have shopping behavior. So analyzing all of that and giving them explainable forecasting actually changed the way they planned their supply chain. Right now they have a data-driven method to really say, okay, for these products, I should really target these demographics in these zones because that's what the population wants. So that's how, that's an example of how AI can change businesses and then really force them to go back to the drawing board. Right. And with cloud and all of these new transformational technologies, it's way much easier now than it was, let's say, 5 years back, right, to disrupt. The other example, maybe it's a good example because we did this during COVID, which is really putting in conversational AI techniques in front of frontline workers, right? So at that point, ICMR was just finalizing their testing procedures for COVID. They were spanning out to public and private testing facilities. And these workers had to deal with a lot of questions on the right procedures, how to manage the stocks, how to make sure people who really need to be tested get the testing. So we worked with them and we understood and we put on an AI system that really opened up. It's not about how the AI questions were actually successful in handling a deluge of conversations, but more importantly, what did it do for the people? It actually freed up those frontline workers to do the real work that they needed to focus on. So I think, so those are examples. I'll also say that, blockchain is of course, and the underpinning of a lot of banks and financial institutions. The lab here in India actually started the first blockchain center in IBM before it became a huge business for IBM. So, yeah. So those are examples, how we disrupt.
Fabulous. Okay, so now there is this whole thing that it's all the innovation is being brought in by startups, right? Whether it's in the fintech space, whether it's in the conventional technology space, AI, whatever you might call it, right? So how does a giant like IBM build an innovation culture within the organization? What is it? I mean, how do you ensure that your employees are creative, that your team members are creative, they're always thinking ahead? What are the fundamentals that an organization needs to put into place to build that culture of innovation and disruption?
Yeah, no, great question. So I'll answer it in two parts. I'll first tell you, how we look at tech giants and the difference that they bring from, let's say, the rest of the players in the ecosystem, and both of them have an equal important part. Then I'll talk about what characteristics does one need to look for to make sure the innovation cycle is going. So the first one, I think, Shweta, there's so much transformational things to do that there's a play for everyone, right? There's a play for these niche players who are agile, who can really quickly cater to a need. There's a play for giants like IBM who provide the platform and the base for making sure these innovations actually are agile and reach out to clients and then can be scaled up, right? Scale is very important in AI. And in IBM, our mantra for being successful with AI is really understanding the language of the business, which is primarily NLP, in being able to automate and scale it out with trust as the underpinning, right? So I think that's our play. And we actually work with the startups to make sure they have a platform on which they can build on and continuously get innovations. One thing that's going to be making all of us successful is reusing each other for our competencies. If you see Netflix, right, started off by shipping DVDs. Why is it successful? Because it built on things like platform and internet to now become biggest content provider of the world. So we absolutely need each other. We need this ecosystem. So startups have their own niche in space. We as tech giants, we have our platforms, we provide compliance and trust. So that healthcare providers, the banks, where do we keep our money? I think we would really rather go to a tech giant because we make sure we comply to all the reg tech, right? So we have our advantages too. Do we need to be agile? Absolutely. In this changing world, we do. And so this is my mantra. I don't know. So there's an S curve for technology. There are certain things where we want to be early innovators, right? We want to be really changing the game, and we have to invest in that, right? The world is listening, but we invest. And there are small such plays that we do. For example, we did this with enterprise middleware. Like I said, we did this with blockchain. I think AI, we are one of the forerunners, right? We showed the world what AI can do. So I think those are certain big bets we take in the low part of S. And then in others, we little bit wait and watch. We have the ecosystem play out.
So I just want to come in here. What would you like to say to a lot of young people who are watching you right now? Why should they choose an IBM over a startup? What can they learn at an IBM that will give them the edge to further build, and innovate, and disrupt?
I mean, because I think IBM is an amalgamation of so many startups. It's so broad. It's a never learning experience. You never, even if you look at my 15 years in IBM or take an IBMer, we can vouch that we've actually been part of at least 4 to 5 companies, because we bring in the breadth of IBM is whether, you want to focus on edge, you want to focus on IoT, AI, cloud. You have that one place and you see that whole big picture connecting the dots. I think that's the beauty. I mean, startups have their own advantages, I won't, but I think IBM has that breadth.
Okay, and what would you like to say to the women watching you right now? If they have, aspirations to build a career in tech, what are the 3 things that you will advise them to do?
Yeah, open to learning, continuous learning. Feel comfortable, get comfortable with failures. If you're not failing 8 out of 10 times, then you're not trying hard enough. So have that as a metric. And the third is, I think, choose your battles, especially to the women, right? I think choose certain things that you want to specialize in, be it work, life, and I'm mixing both boundaries, but choose your battles and win those.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Gargi. Lovely talking to you, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you.